September 1st, 1943. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai reads the intelligence report twice. Then he laughs. He has one eye. The other lost to American gunners a year earlier over Guadalcanal. Even half blind, he can see what his analysts cannot. The Americans have built something absurd. A new fighter, heavy as a torpedo bomber, wide as a transport, twice the weight of the aircraft that has ruled Pacific skies for 2 years. They call it the Hellcat. Sakai sets the report down and steps into the blinding sun. Lined up on the pierced steel planking before him, a row of A6M Zeros, sleek, nimble, lethal. For 24 months, these aircraft have swatted British Hurricanes, American P-40s, and Dutch Brewster Buffaloes from the sky with something approaching contempt. He shakes his head and smiles. The Americans, always building bigger, never building better. In 30 days, that smile would cost Japan everything. Act 1. The sword. Before we understand how the Hellcat shattered Japanese air power, we have to understand what it was up against, because the Zero wasn't just a fighter, it was a revolution. When American engineers got their hands on a captured Zero in 1942, they refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, speed that shouldn't have been possible at that weight. They ran the tests again, then a third time. The numbers didn't change. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who had become Japan's top ace with 87 confirmed kills, described it in his diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. He wasn't wrong. The Zero achieved its performance through radical design choices that bordered on philosophy. Mitsubishi's engineers used a classified aluminum alloy to build a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. They stripped out the armor plating, removed the self-sealing fuel tanks. Some pilots flew without radios to save 30 pounds, every ounce sacrificed at the altar of speed and maneuverability. The results were devastating. Pearl Harbor, 347 American aircraft destroyed. Japanese losses, 29. The Philippines, 103 destroyed, 7 lost. Darwin, Australia, 30 destroyed, 2 lost. By the time the war was 6 months old, the British Far East Fleet's air arm was gone. The Dutch East Indies Air Force had been eliminated in days. Japanese naval aviators hadn't just won battles, they had made air combat feel like a hunting expedition. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the Hellcat's specifications when they arrived through neutral Swedish intelligence channels in early 1943. His assessment was preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics appeared to support him. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot gave it a turning radius of just 612 feet. The Hellcat, at 36.5 pounds per square foot, was projected to need over 900 feet to complete the same turn. In the turning dogfight that formed the core of Japanese aerial tactics, the Hellcat should have been helpless. Should have been. Ast 2. The First Blood, September 30th, 1943. Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui is flying escort when he spots 6 dark blue shapes climbing out of the southeast. His first thought, B-25 bombers, odd heading. Then they turn, single engine, massive fuselage, wings that look too small for the body. In his after-action report, Fukui writes, "Initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber." He rolls into a diving turn, executing the move that has killed 100 Allied pilots before this day. The maneuver is elegant, proven, automatic. Curve beneath the heavy American fighter, let it fly straight, rise onto its 6 o'clock, fire. The Hellcat doesn't fly straight, it goes vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, producing 2,000 horsepower, nearly 900 more than the Zero's engine, drives the American fighter upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui pulls back and tries to follow. He watches his airspeed decay as gravity wins. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performs a maneuver that defies its weight. A hammerhead turn, pivoting on its wingtip, dropping its nose directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui later writes. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived. His wingman did not. Neither did the reconnaissance aircraft they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat. Act 4. The collapse. The Japanese pilot problem became catastrophic in ways that intelligence reports couldn't fully capture. Before the war, the Imperial Navy's flight training program had been the most demanding on Earth. Pilots trained for 3 years. They entered combat with 700 flight hours. They were selected from thousands of applicants, drilled in aerobatics, gunnery, formation flying, and something the Japanese called the spirit of air combat. By early 1944, new Japanese naval pilots were arriving at the front with 300 hours. By mid-1944, 200. Fuel shortages meant training was being conducted in gliders. Gunnery practice was rationed to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, night flying, instrument procedures, all cut to rush men into aircraft before they were ready. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with 300 hours minimum, 50 of them in the specific aircraft they would fly in combat, after firing thousands of rounds at gunnery ranges over Texas and practicing carrier landings until the movement was muscle memory. Training Officer Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto wrote from Kasumigara Naval Air Station in what would be one of his final reports. "We are sending children to fight professionals. Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. We have no ammunition for practice. He had never flown at night. We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. Act 5. The Turkey Shoot. June 19th, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy has spent months rebuilding its carrier air groups for one decisive engagement. Operation Ago. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots. The plan is to use the Zero's superior range to strike American carriers from beyond the reach of American fighters, then land at Guam to refuel and strike again on the return. Against them, Task Force 58, 15 carriers, 956 aircraft, 450 of them Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launches his first strike wave at 0830, 69 aircraft climbing toward the American fleet. American radar picks them up at 150 miles. Hellcats are vectored to intercept with textbook positioning, altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spot. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, sees the Americans minutes before contact. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, commanding Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, got 6. McCampbell's after-action report was almost casual in its detachment. "The Zeros tried to turn with us. We simply refused. We'd make a high-side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By sunset, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft, plus 50 land-based planes. American losses, 30 aircraft, from all causes." American pilots coined the name in their ready rooms that evening, the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Act 6. The Reckoning. The numbers at war's end are almost too stark to absorb. The F6F Hellcat flew combat operations for less than 2 years. In that time, it destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. It lost 270 to enemy fighters. Its kill ratio, 19-1. It produced 305 US Navy aces. It accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories in the entire Pacific War. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had begun the war with Japan, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained alive by August 1945. The rest had been killed, many of them by an aircraft their commanders had dismissed in a tent on Rabaul 2 years and an entire civilization earlier. Grumman's factory at Bethpage, New York ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company built 12,275 of them in 30 months. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 that year alone. Epilogue, August 15th, 1945. Atsugi Airfield. Captain Minoru Genda, the man who planned Pearl Harbor, the man who read the Hellcat's specifications and called them a continuation of American failure, stands on the flight line and listens to Emperor Hirohito's voice on a radio broadcast. Around him, teenagers with 40 hours of flight time, aircraft assembled from spare parts, fuel tanks running empty. The war is over. In September, 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown are the first American aircraft to land at Atsugi after the surrender. Japanese pilots and mechanics line the runway to see what has beaten them. Lieutenant Robert Volpel, an ace with 19 kills, demonstrates the Hellcat's capabilities for the assembled crowd. Loops, rolls, climbs that would have torn a Zero apart at the rivets. Through an interpreter, he tells them, "This isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The airframe is stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one." Silence. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the man who had designed the Zero, studied captured Hellcats after the war and reached a conclusion that was devastating in its simplicity. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age." Close Saburo Sakai survived the war. He lived until the year 2000. In one of his final interviews, he was asked about the Hellcat. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future." He paused. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed. It carried armour the Zero didn't have. It was powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, guided by radar they couldn't detect, flown by pilots who trained longer, and produced in numbers that defied comprehension. Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound wasn't a flaw in the design. Every extra pound was the weight of a nation that could afford to bring its warriors home. By the time they understood, the laughter had stopped. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.